And again, every single stage, it doesn't matter which stage you're in, as long as you can identify and be in that stage and create content and build that muscle. Like I'm always talking about create, practice, 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 because if you're waiting for that perfect moment, the perfect setup, guess what? It's not going to happen.
Right.
Welcome to Be Bold Branding, where we discuss the power of differentiating yourself through your own unique story and standout personal brand.
If you've ever thought of recording a video, class, or course for your business and you feel like a deer in headlights, this episode is for you. Junaid Ahmed went through the same thing years ago himself. He quickly realized he didn't have the right tools, his setting was unimpressive, and every solution he could think of seemed to be complicated and temporary. Well, that's when he set out to change his situation and hundreds of others by creating Home Studio Mastery. So whether you're a seasoned podcaster, a budding YouTuber, or an entrepreneur looking to enhance your digital experience, we're talking about Junaid's solutions today, along with his new book, 7 Stages of Home Studio Evolution, from Beginner to Broadcast Quality.
Junaid, welcome to Be Bold Branding.
Oh my God, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much for bringing me on.
Absolutely. We've been a big Junaid fan for years and years. We met, where did we meet?
I think we met at the Elite
Yep.
Mastermind with Chris Williams.
That's right.
Yes,
Yep.
that's absolutely true. Yeah,
Yep.
And we also had a lot of dealings with you through Podmatch and Alex Info as well. So
That's right.
we kind of got tied into an awesome group of people in that arrangement. So yeah, it was so nice to meet you because, you know, at the time you had some great influence on our set right now, but what most people don't know is you're behind the scenes helping to craft our set right now, which will be in a separate room from here, and coming soon to the podcast room near you.
Hopefully coming soon, right?
We've been the ones dragging our feet, but I'm very excited about what Junaid's working on behind the scenes here, and hopefully we'll be able to introduce that to you guys coming up pretty soon.
Yeah, a little teaser there.
Oh yeah.
So let's get to it, Junaid. Let's talk about your book. Let's just dive right in. What are the 7 stages in your book?
So 7 different stages are, number 1 is the novice. This is somebody who's just getting started, and we all have the tools to be a novice. You know, you're just getting started. You might have a smartphone, you might have a lav mic. You know, it's something that you can capture videos from and capture them efficiently. The next step up is the hobbyist. You're like, okay, I'm doing this as a hobby. Let me invest some more money in it. And then from the hobbyist, then you go to the enthusiast level. Then from enthusiast, you get to semi-pro. Then you become a pro. And then after the pro, you become an expert. And then following expert is the broadcaster. And again, every single stage, it doesn't matter which stage you're in, as long as you can identify and be in that stage and create content and build that muscle. Like I'm always talking about create, practice, 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 because if you're waiting for that perfect moment, the perfect setup, guess what? It's not going to happen.
Right.
Yeah, that's so true.
It's done's better than perfect.
That is right.
And yeah, you have to go out there. We learned that in our journey. And we've talked about it before and shared it with you before about how terrible it was. But yeah, if there's a listener out there, you know, that's dragging because, you know, to your point, quit, like get started. And then it is a muscle. I like how you use that analogy. It's a muscle that you are going to improve upon by just practicing it and being out there.
Yeah, Michael alluded to, but he didn't finish the story here, how awful it was in the beginning. He says, our podcast was absolutely terrible when we first started. I was in my home office in Columbus, Ohio. Michael was on the road traveling a lot. And sometimes he'd just pull over on the side of the road somewhere at a gas station or wherever that he felt like he had good reception. And we would he would hang towels up in his windows to cut down on the glare. I tell you, it was the worst looking podcast.
It was. was.
It was terrible. But back then, done was better than perfect. And it certainly wasn't perfect, but we did do it. And we managed, throughout the years to like, okay, well, let's get this new piece of equipment. Let's hone in on this a little bit more. Let's pay
Mhm.
attention to people like Junaid. And I think that made a huge, huge difference. Out of all those avatars and those stages that you just mentioned, what would you say would be what would you consider the level that most podcasters are at today?
Most podcasters, they spend the time and they purchase the microphone because you gotta be able to hear the speaker, the podcaster. So they are, I would say, they are at the enthusiast level, right? Or maybe they could even be in a hobbyist level, because hobbyist level is, I recommend, like, hey, you gotta have a microphone that can capture your audio accurately and legibly, because if people cannot pay attention to what you're saying, it's like that movie, Shanghai. No, it's not Shanghai. It's the one with Jackie Chan. He's like, "Do you understand the words coming out of my mouth?"
Oh yeah.
Right.
Yes.
So again, it's important to have the microphone. I think most people are on the hobbyist stage because they've made a purchase. They've purchased a microphone. They might not have the right webcam, the right lighting, the right camera, but at least they're like, okay, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna spend some more time on it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and now that you say spend more time on it, like you share in your book some rules of a well-balanced studio. Tell me what you mean by that, first of all, and then what are some of those rules?
Absolutely. So being a well-balanced studio means that you're not spending too much on one aspect of the area. You're slowly leveling up the entirety of that space. So, for example, most people will come and ask me, "Hey, what camera are you using?" And I'll tell them, "Well, this camera costs $3,500. Do you want to spend $3,500 on one thing, or do you want to spend $3,500 on everything that's going to level up your space?" Because not just purchasing a high-end camera or a high-end microphone is not going to do it all. It's like you're putting an entire package together that's going to come through. So that's what I mean by a well-balanced studio. So you have the lighting in place, you have the microphone, you have the sound absorption, the room treatment, and that you're looking directly into the camera. You're looking good in that set. Maybe spend some time in decorating your room. Maybe spend some time in bringing on all of the aspects that uh, that separate you from the crowds. So being very intentional in what you put together. So that's what I mean by creating a balanced studio space as you're growing
Mm-hmm.
along the way.
Mm-hmm. What about backdrops? Clearly important, especially for video podcasts, which I think that's the future, right?
Yes.
So, yeah, what are some of your favorite strategies for backdrops?
So what I like to do in the backdrop is have, for example, you have the BrandFace written on there, and I can see it clearly. As soon as the video turns on, I know exactly what I'm going to be listening about and what the podcast is about. So again, those are some of the background things that you want to bring in that highlight you. Now, a lot of people have been using virtual backgrounds or blurring their backgrounds via software. I don't recommend it because what it does, it disconnects you from the person who's in the video or the person who's going to be watching you. You know,
Mm-hmm.
we are in an era where we want more authentic. We want more, uh, human on the other side. Because with AI, you can do so many things, right? We're in this era right now, like anything and everything can be generated by just writing a prompt. So the more authentic you show up in that shot, like for example, my background is blurred only because it's a functionality of the lens that I'm using, the setup that I'm using. And so again, look at what's gonna make you stand out. Look at what you're focusing on in that background, and go from there. Just so little step at a time, you put it together.
Mm-hmm.
I never thought of it that way before, that authenticity is so big and kind of it separates you from the reality of, are you really in that space? Is that like like the reality of where you are.
Yeah.
But another thing we faced a lot in podcasting is that people will show up with a virtual background and they don't have that perfect lighting.
Mhm.
So whenever they move, their head disappears or their shoulder disappears. Big pet peeve. We
Yes.
actually started, a while back putting out these instructions that say, please, 0 virtual backgrounds, because
Mhm.
you never know. You can say, unless you have perfect lighting, but
Yeah.
one person might think it's perfect, and by the time you get on the show, it's too late. Right?
Yes.
100%.
Yeah, we've seen very few people that can pull off the virtuals over our time of doing it.
Yeah.
The 40.
If you really think about it, a lot of the movies have used green screen,
Right.
but you can't tell it because they've specifically spent time in making that a reality, right? So there's a lot of things, but again, the more time you spend in setting up that space, for example, a friend of mine, Jeff in HD or Jeff in High Def is his website. He uses virtual background all the time, but you can't tell because he has that level of expertise. He has that level of professionalism to set it up in a way that makes it look, oh my God, he's in the studio. He's in that space, and that background kind of reflects that. So again, there's a lot of different levels, right? Again, you can get to it. You can go so much with no money spent, and sure, uh, the virtual background made a lot of sense, especially for when we were during a pandemic, right? A lot of the kids that are going to school, they were using those virtual backgrounds because they didn't want to show off, where they are in the poor setup that they had. But again, as a professional, we here are professionals. We are an entrepreneur. We're an author. We're a podcaster. We are building our brand. We're building our connection with the audience. So, do you want to show up as somebody who's real or somebody who's fake? So
Yeah.
that's
Mhm.
what's
So
about.
true. Well, just since we're on the topic of being podcasters, all three of us, what do you do when a guest shows up and they have either a bad background or their audio is really, really terrible? What's the kind way to handle that?
Well, what I do for my podcast is I will have a pre-interview call with somebody who's looking to come on the podcast. So that's the first thing that I do. The second thing, if somebody does find my link and books themselves on the podcast, I'm like, that's fine. I'm sending them emails like, hey, we're not going to use virtual background. We're going to use good quality microphones. Here's a list of microphones that you can use. You want to make sure that you're using a window as a good light or dedicated lighting. Make sure there's no windows in the background, so it's not overtaking your image. So again, I'm sending them these tips along the way so that they are better uh, prepared. And even if all of those things don't work, and we come to the day of recording, and show up, I'm like, well, we'll have to reschedule. We'll have to do this because we, as podcast hosts, we care about the audience that's listening. We want to create a good product. We want to create an evergreen episode that's going to not only highlight the guest that's coming on, but also highlight and create valuable content for the listeners as well.
Like what you're hearing? Hit that subscribe button and learn how you can change how you're seen and charge what you're worth.
We agree. What about our video podcasters out there? Do they need to be moving? HD, 4K, 8K. Like what's your recommendations on this?
So
looking
that's
into the future a little.
absolutely. So the thing is, we are creating visual content that's going to be living on YouTube, that's going to be living on platforms where you can consume video content. Now, I was just reading a post earlier where the guy was like, here, I said it, your podcast needs to be on YouTube. The reason for that is there's about 2.5 billion monthly active users on YouTube, plus a billion hours of video is watched every single day. So you're going to get a lot of traffic from YouTube. So make sure that when you are launching your video podcast, that you're thinking about video, or when you're launching your podcast, you're thinking about video as one thing, as the first thing. The second thing is, let's say people like, I don't want to launch a video podcast. I just want it to be audio based, which is totally fine. There's a ton of new podcasts jumping on the in the space that are audio only. For example, Disney's Frozen podcast. It's a podcast around Frozen, the movie, and it's all audio produced. It's a well produced radio show for audio listening podcasts, which is also great. So again, you got to look at, hey, who's the target audience? Who's going to be watching this? What do you want out of this podcast? And then based on those questions that you answer for yourself, then you can decide, okay, this is going to be audio only, or I'm also going to integrate video.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I heard a few years ago that 4K, and then of course 8K came along, and it's like, okay, do you go ahead and make that investment or not? And I think what I'm hearing you say is that in the long run, if it's definitely going to be more visually oriented, it might be a good idea to go ahead and make that leap.
Yeah. And again, for 8K is really far fetching right now. Even 4K, YouTube can deliver that 4K content to a lot of the platforms. Facebook right now is still pushing 1080p HD content only if you're a gamer. Right? 4K comes after. 4K is not available there because again, it takes a lot of bandwidth to produce, store, push it out. There's a lot of bandwidth issue involved around it. So again, having the right workflow. So for example, somebody just starting out, you're probably going to be using StreamYard or Zoom as your main platform. There was a study done by co-host .io, I think. They're a podcast agency, and they interviewed over 45 different podcast networks and podcast agencies, asking, hey, which are the platforms that your users are using? And Zoom came out to be number 7, 75% of the people using the platform to record podcasts. So again, having good quality video doesn't mean that you need to do 4K or 8K. Because I'm shooting, I'm sending this feed at 720p to StreamYard. But because I have that setup done correctly, it's going to look good no matter the size, 4K, 8K, because I've done the sourcing. The source is coming really clean, so it's going to look good even if it's compressed down.
Yeah, that totally makes sense to me. Now we're going to throw something new at you, Junaid. Probably not prepared for this. Okay, so
Let's hear it.
What about a traveling studio? Okay, so here's why I ask. Michael and I love to travel, and we have this camper van that we bought over a year ago, and we just go all over the place in it. And we thought, you know what if we just went away for like a couple of months out to the West Coast, and we could still do our podcast on the go and so forth. Number one, do you recommend that? And number two, if you did, like, what would be some of the tips that you would say, okay, if you're going to be that crazy, at least do this, right?
Well, I love that question. And you might think that I've never been asked that before. But here's the deal, right? I was listening to Green Lights by Matthew McConaughey, the book.
Yeah,
and
great book.
Right, it's an amazing book. And he lived in a trailer for at least a couple of years. And he was talking about how he had installed a dedicated microphone in his car, in his van, in his RV, so that he can record on the go, connected to a deck and whatnot. So he basically could record anything that comes to mind. You just hit the record button and you just start talking. And because he's on the road all the time, and so you want to be able to travel, which is amazing. Now, there's several different tools available to us right now. One of the tools is called a No Mono. It's a little device about the size of a toaster, and it has 4 wireless microphones that you can have up to 4 people attached to it. Right? Each microphone goes to 4 people, and this thing has a total of 8 microphones in the little console, and then 4 microphones on each of the person. So you can record a 4-person conversation on the road, in a car, or wherever you are, and it'll cancel out all of the extra noise, that's not relevant to the conversation,
Hmm.
and capture the audio really good. So that's one product. Now this is audio only solution, so you can add video by adding multiple cameras and bring all this stuff together again post production. Another tool that we were able to put together is called a Go Box Studio. It's a portable studio in a box, comes with microphones, comes with the video and lighting, so that you can literally set up a studio no matter where you are, in your camper van, at a park, at a park bench, all so that you can record really good conversation. And I've actually traveled with this thing to multiple different locations, multiple different events. In fact, I was at Podcast Movement 2024 in DC last month, and we had 2 dedicated booths set up so that people can come and record their podcasts with the people who they've been working with for the past few years, but hadn't had a chance to record in person. So again, we created a solution like that called the GoBox Studio that will enable you to do that. So again, there are many different ways that you can still, create audio podcasts. And to give you one more thing, when I started my podcast, Hacks and Hobbies, the entire first season was recorded in my car while I was commuting to and from work.
Wow. What a story. That's awesome.
Yep, that's fantastic.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
We need to get the link for GoBox Studio and put it in the show
Absolutely.
notes.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely, so people can check that out.
Yeah.
We knew you would know the answer to it. Tanya and I used to, early on with BrandFace, we used to be involved with a voiceover conference,
Mm-hmm.
and we would speak at it and and teach branding to voiceover artists and stuff like that. And I remember there were a couple of groups that had stuff. I just didn't know if the podcast community had adapted with that.
No, 100%. I've actually seen some projects that are podcast specific. So they've built like audio recording equipment into like a case so that you can, set up audio no matter where you are. But we wanted to focus on bringing video together in here as well. So if you head on over to goboxstudio.com, put in Super J10, you get a 10% discount. But yeah, that's how you can take a look at that as well.
Awesome. We'll put that
thank
in the
you
show
for
notes
that.
for sure.
You bet.
Awesome.
And one more question for you here. How's your beekeeping going this year? You still got time for some hobby and beekeeping? Are you growing it into a massive farm? What's going on?
So I'm sad to say that my bees left.
We feel your pain.
I know your pain. That's the reason I asked. I was hopeful that your fate would not be the same as so many of us.
I know
the
it's been a very, very interesting winters for sure. When those warm spring days come, the bees go out, and then the next couple of days it's too cold, and they don't have anything, and they're just not able to survive. So I've been out of the beekeeping space for for a few, but hopefully get back into it in the future. Again, there's I'm tending to 4 kids right now, so it's a lot of work for sure.
Your plate's full. I know, trust me. I know. It's but once they're in your bloodstream, they never go away. And in fact, I went down to the shop. We got in from out of town yesterday, and I went down. It was still a beautiful day and beautiful afternoon. I went down to the shop, and I noticed there was a flurry of bees around the back of one of the trucks. And I was like, what's going on here? And I went down there, and apparently somebody had left a couple of bottles that were just damaged, or, the labels were messed up or something like that. And the sun had caused the tops to pop on them. And the bees found it, which was awesome.
Yep.
And I stood there and watched them for about 15 minutes. Just
Nice.
thousands of bees cleaning these bottles for us, so we don't have to do it, which is awesome. So
yeah, it is really neat. And for those of you who don't know, obviously Michael and Junaid both are beekeepers. So more about that story later. But Junaid, let's sadly, we'll conclude here, but we'll have you back on some other time to talk a lot more about podcasting.
Absolutely.
Tell everybody where they can find your book, 7 Stages to Home Studio Evolution from Beginner to Broadcast Quality.
Yeah, so the book is available on Amazon and other places, and several different formats. I've got hardcover, paperback, the digital, and I'm working on the audiobook as well, so that you can listen to my lovely voice
Nice. I love it.
listening to the book. So it's available on Amazon, and we'll have the, I'll send you the links for the book for the show.
All right.
Yes,
Awesome.
please do. And finally, do you tell everybody if they want to work with you, what is the best way to contact and reach out to you?
Absolutely. So I head on over to homestudiomastery.com. I have a 4-point free inspection or assessment for you that you can like, hey, I'm creating video content. I'm going to be a guest on the podcast. What can I do to get that set up better? Head on over to homestudiomastery.com, click on that 4-point assessment, and I'll be happy to help you get you straightened up.
And we encourage the listeners to do so. Tanya and I do. We put our faith behind Junaid. We pray that you do the same thing. And Junaid, thank you so much for being on the show again and seeing you again.
Thank you so much, Tanya, and thank you, Michael. This was so much fun. Got to chat with you guys again, and thanks so much.
Ready to change how you're seen and charge what you're worth? If you're not getting enough opportunities to meet with ideal customers, or the prospects you're meeting with just aren't ideal, it's most likely your brand that's holding you back. So if you're a coach, consultant, or expert who is on the rise, you need our ultimate guide to a freedom-based brand. Download it free now at BrandFaceGuide.com.